Welcome to Baal Teshuvah Express with Gamliel. So last week we spoke to Motto and Zahava.
Yes.
Mostly with Zahava.
Yes.
Right?
We had a nice conversation.
And she gave a lot of credit to who?
She said Badermans.
The Badermans.
I don't know who they are.
This is Mr. Baderman.
Oh, that's the Mr.
And where are we? We're in Mr. Baderman's and the Baderman's family escape room. We're in Rashi's room, right? We're in the only Jewish escape room, correct?
In America.
In America.
In America.
Okay.
Yes.
So if you're looking for a Jewish escape room and you don't feel like going to Israel, you come here, right?
That's right.
Only Jewish escape room. So I'm sure, right? I'm sure because he told me that there's some connection between your Baal Teshuvah story and the escape room, right?
That's right.
So we'll get to it eventually, right?
Oh, we will.
Definitely.
Yes.
Okay, but first do us a favor, please help us out and tell us a little bit about your journey.
Absolutely. Thank you for your interest in my journey. Let me start early. Just like most people or a big minority of people in Rabbi Cohen's Chabad house, I speak Russian, and I was born in the former Soviet Union, in a very interesting place. It's called Moldavia. It's the poorest country in Europe with the highest rate of alcohol consumption per capita. It's a very illustrious, very unbelievable place to come out of. I'm extremely proud that I was born there.
To survive.
Yes, that I survived, and those two things, the alcohol consumption and their economic status are obviously connected. So, but that's where I grew
From what
up.
I heard, from Moldavia, they're wine drinkers. That's not
Yeah, wine drinkers. They buy wine by buckets. They don't buy by
The whole barrel,
by bottles. They buy a bucket of wine.
and drink it.
And you're serious or that's a joke?
No, that's how, like, when you go to the countryside and like peasants, they don't just go to the store and buy a bottle of wine.
So you go to
They
the
go to a
factory?
winery and they buy a bucket.
A bucket. Wow.
Yeah.
And my family, my father's side actually comes from a very interesting place called Rybnitsa, which is where a very famous tzaddik.
That Rybnitz, the
The
Rybnitz
Rebbe, Rybnitsa in Moldavia. In Moldavia, there were tzaddikim that lived there, and the Rybnitsa Rebbe happens to be, that's his hometown, that's where my father is from, and my father's bris was performed by this great tzaddik.
Interesting. Let me just the Rybnitz Rebbe that's buried in Muncie.
That's
he was
him.
born
That's
there.
him.
Or
Yeah,
he was born in.
I'm not sure if he was born in that specific town, but he's mostly known by that town. He lived all over the world. He lived in Eretz Yisrael, he lived in LA, he lived here, he lived in Seagate. He moved around, but he's known as the Rybnitsa Rebbe, and my father's from Rybnitsa. And one thing about Rybnitsa, the Rybnitsa Rebbe was a type of a tzaddik. When he was called on to make a bris on a little boy, which is obviously we make a bris at 8 days old, he went through a whole avodah, through a whole divine service to daven for the neshama of this little boy. And he davened for this boy, he thought he connected with this neshama, and he maintained a connection with that neshama for that person's entire life.
Wow.
There are stories of how he knows exactly what's happening to these people that he made a bris on. There are stories how he would go, he would just say to his driver, we're going somewhere, we're getting up at 5:30 in the morning, we're going to Tveria. And in Tveria, he arrives, he opens the window, there's a boy passing by, he calls him and says, Pinchas, Mazel Tov on your bar mitzvah. In other words, he knows exactly, so I assume that the same thing happened to my father, and that this unbelievable tzaddik maintained a connection with my father's neshama forever.
Now, when you say he made the bris, he was the son?
He was the moed.
He was the moed.
He was the moed. And actually, my grandmother, who was a a communist by conviction and a nurse, we understand, was asked to join him several times as kind of a medical professional, because the Rebbe for people that never saw him or never met him or never saw videos of him, he looked like a malach. He looked like an angel, and he was not really here in this world. He was constantly like thinking and meditating. And people were afraid that he's gonna cut off their head, and that's why he asked to put people at ease that a nurse and a medical professional. And my Bobby went at least several times. We have discussed that she went with him, and when he didn't need her. But apparently he asked that she should be present so that the family should feel easier, because we're talking about people that were not believers, communists. They understood that bris is very important. They were not ready to forego that connection with Hashem, even though they may not believe in Torah. But bris, they understood that they have to do.
Gamliel, I want to ask you a question. Where I'm from, Azerbaijan.
Yeah.
It's a Muslim country. So Soviet Union, they couldn't just prohibit bris, because you can't prohibit bris for the whole country. So it was okay to do bris. But so I guess in Moldova also it was okay, or it was not in the...
Well, it depends. At some points in history it was not okay.
Yeah.
And they had to do it in secret. It was very, very dangerous.
Was it officially illegal, or was just if you do it, you get in trouble?
I guess there are several periods. During Stalin's time, when the persecution against religion was the most intense, it could be that it was very, very... I mean, there are stories where the Rebbe had to walk for several days through the forests in secret to arrive at a certain place when nobody was there, and I understand that there were problems. Legally, how it worked, that we can do that. We can check, but either it was illegal or it was legal, but so not done, so improper to do that people could lose their job and so on, or get imprisoned, or be sent to exile.
It's like when they want to stop somebody, they involve the IRS. You know what I'm saying? The IRS, right? Anything you can do, you can always set somebody. IRS is a very easy way to throw someone over. Okay, so that's
where my father's from. My mother's family is from another small shtetl, where I remember still to this day my grandfather, Mordechai, Alav Shalom, speaking with his Goyish neighbor in Yiddish.
Wow.
For all the Goyim spoke Yiddish.
So it was a real shtetl.
It was a shtetl, yeah. Well, vast majority of people were Jews. And I remember the Goy, his father used to be the mayor of the town. And they were talking in Yiddish.
I want to tell people, anybody watching this that doesn't know so much about the Soviet Union, because of World War II, because of the Holocaust, what happened in Russia to the Jewish communities went a little bit to the side. We don't understand what happened. It was a beautiful, humongous, beautiful Jewish community with a lot of shtetl and beautiful kehillas, beautiful communities, right? That just disappeared. Everything. Not in the way of the Nazis, but in a different way. Yeah. If not the Nazis, we would be talking about this every single day. It's just that then the Holocaust came, and that made this as if it's a little bit less worse. But what happened there is disaster. People don't know this. I didn't know about this before I came to shul here with so many Russians in this Chabad shul. I didn't know. They were communists. They were bad for Jews. There were probably 20 Jews there that needed to run away. I didn't understand how big it was. How many? There was millions of Jews, probably millions of Jews, right? Millions of Jews that got they broke them apart into pieces, right? Some of them till today don't even know they're Jews because of what happened.
They tried to break the chain from the father to the son. What they did, they closed the yeshivas, they closed the education. They tried to stop the Judaism.
Wow.
They did everything.
And they were pretty successful.
And they were
But in the 90s, which was pretty late for Jews, a lot of the Jews in the Soviet Union that were very involved and kind of very aware of their Jewishness left in the 70s, like Velvel. You know Velvel?
Yeah.
So this is a type of a Jew, very visceral, very, very Jewish Jew, that they left in the 70s. They were actually actively looking to leave as soon as they could, and to go anywhere. And then Jews that kind of were comfortable in the Soviet Union, those are the guys that left in the 90s and so on. So we were, of those Jews. We were kind of middle class. My father is an attorney, and we left in the mid 90s. We came here, and
From the mid-90s you lived here?
mid 90s. I left the Soviet Union in 1995. It wasn't Soviet Union anymore.
It's fresh stuff.
Yeah,
Okay.
1995. Yeah, that's when I arrived here as a teenager, 17. And interesting thing about my family life is that my father, I mentioned, is an attorney. It was very, very difficult for him to become an attorney. It took him many years to get admitted into law school. I mean, they had problems with the Jews. They had quotas. Jews had a hard time with with universities. Ultimately, he was able to graduate. And one day, when he was ready to get a job in a state economy, the government gives you a job. So he was given a job in Murmansk, and Murmansk is the biggest city on earth beyond the polar circle. If you can imagine, the globe, the northern edge of the globe, where the Arctica. So it's a giant city. It's more than 1 million people.
Wow.
It's a major port, military port, fishing port, and the 1 million people living there. That's where my father let us send this Jew over there.
I want to tell you something. It's cold there.
Yeah, it's a little cold. Yeah. Put on a sweater.
So the winter there is 9 months long. And that's
You don't need air conditioning.
and so that's where even though my father is
We
from
used to go to Florida every 2 months for vacation.
even though my father is from Moldavia, which has a very moderate climate, very warm. It's kind of a little bit similar to what we have here, but he was sent to that place, and obviously I went with my parents. I'm my parents' firstborn, and they discovered that it's very bad for my health to live there. And I went to my grandparents, and I grew up with my grandparents, my mother's parents, in my mother's hometown in
What age
Colorado.
was that? What age was
I remember I even went to school. I started school already there, probably from around age 5, if not early. I was already living with my grandparents, and my parents visited several times a year. But I didn't live with my parents. So I lived with my grandmother. So my grandmother, Babushka Mara, Miriam. My grandmother was a Holocaust survivor. She became an orphan during the Holocaust. She spent the war in Kazakhstan.
She was a Holocaust survivor from Russia? How is that?
She survived the Holocaust in Russia, in the Soviet Union. She was evacuated from Moldavia to Kazakhstan.
Interesting.
And that's why she became an orphan. She was in an orphanage. That's where she grew up. Yeah.
Wow, so they have the Holocaust
So she
story
survived
background with.
because the Nazis got there, and most Jews in that place were killed. So she survived that.
Nation. Wow.
So she survived that in Kazakhstan. So people that went to Uzbekistan, Tashkent, and so on. My grandmother went to Kazakhstan.
Every time the Nazis would come and occupy a new territory, Russia, the Soviet Union, the first thing they did, they looked for Jews.
Absolutely.
That's the first thing they did. They
But
looked
when
for
we
Jews.
talk about the Holocaust story, we don't really talk about Russian Jews so much. It's not the
But
so
they,
the Polish Jews, the Hungarian Jews, right?
yeah, Russian Jews also. It's just that the Soviet Union was, as usual, very slow about documenting things and talking about. They wanted to present it not as a Holocaust, but the great patriotic Second War, and they de-emphasized the Jewish story. They didn't want to talk about Nazis' first objective being killing the Jews. They wanted to say that Nazis were trying to dominate the world and we were fighting them, and so the Jewish story kind of got lost. as a footnote.
That's a whole nother.
But for Nazis, Jews were they were interested in Jews. That's why they were fighting the war, and that we now understand. Even growing up, we did not understand that. Okay, so I grew up with my grandmother. Now, when we moved to the U.S., my grandmother came here, and she became ill here. She was not very old. She was in her mid-60s, and this is the first time that I felt that I want to die. I understood that she's very ill and that she's probably not going to live.
Gamliel, before we get to that, so up to that moment that you want to die, right? You grew up in Soviet Union, not so religious.
No, not religious at all.
Yeah.
For 1 year in high school, I went to a Jewish school in Kishinev, which is the capital of Moldavia. There was kind of a Sakhnut supported Jewish school. I went there, so I learned the basics.
That must have been like in the late 80s. Right?
It was in the early 90s.
Oh, early 90s already, everything changed.
So I went to the Jewish school, so I learned about Shabbat, I learned about kosher, I went to a Jewish camp, and then
Not religious, right?
Not, it wasn't. There were
So was it
religious.
science?
There were like Bnei Akiva guys that were teaching there, but it was very. It was kind of oriented towards encouraging Aliyah. It was supported by Sakhnut, the Jewish agency, and it was a very depressing time because everybody was leaving, and it was kind of hard to be among Jews because everyone is leaving. And
whoever wanted his
like
Judaism.
as soon as you form a friendship, they're leaving. Everybody's leaving. So I left that school. I went to a regular high school. I continued my education in a regular high school, and kind of my Judaism took a back seat, at that point until we left. And when we left, I went to college. I got accepted into a good school. I went to Columbia. And then my grandmother became ill, and for the first time in my life, I felt the need to pray. I understood that there is no medical solution to her problem.
And this is the same grandmother you
This is the grandmother that I grew up with. I was very, very close with her. We were living in the same apartment. And I did all the research, and I understood from whatever I was reading that her prognosis is very, very poor. And then at that point, I decided that I want to pray for her, and I went to a neighborhood shul. We have.
Also, you wanted to pray in a shul.
I wanted to pray in a.
Because there's praying in pajamas also.
Yes,
No,
I wanted
to.
to. I wanted to kind of explore more about Judaism, to learn. I always knew that I'm a Jew, but we were not observant, and I felt that I remember coming into the shul. I remember there was an old man standing in the. It was Shabbos. Standing in the lobby, he was a shamus.
Which shul was it?
It was Young Israel of Kings Bay. It's on Ocean Avenue, Rabbi Simpson Shul in Chipson Bay. So it's on Ocean Avenue and Z. And I remember the question I asked him. I asked him, how could I become a little bit more Jewish? That's what I asked. That's the question I asked. And there
We
was
should all ask that question.
and he said, and he knew exactly what to answer me. There was a young man. His name is Yaakov Baum. He was a Lubavitcher from Crown Heights, a Russian Baal Teshuvah Lubavitcher that walked every Shabbos to Chipson Bay, and in that shul he gave classes and
Every Shabbos from Crown Heights to
he
Chipson?
walked every Shabbos.
Wow.
He didn't want to move to Chipson Bay, but he walked. And I remember he sat down with me in the main sanctuary. It was dark. There was like a couple of lights, just like here. And he started telling me about Yiddishkeit. And he had a tremendous influence on me.
So Rabbi Simpson introduced you to this Lubavitcher.
This Lubavitcher young man. Unfortunately, he died of COVID recently, and he was in his early 50s.
Wow.
So Yaakov really had a tremendous influence on me. He bought, he bought tefillin for me. He bought siddur for me at tzitzis, and ultimately I started learning with him. I started going to classes, and I was in the meantime in school, in college, and I don't know if you remember, there used to be such a paper called Village Voice. You ever heard of the Village Voice? It was a very leftist. Yeah, it was newspaper called Village Voice. It was a kind of extremely leftist paper they would give out to students. And in the back of it, there was an ad that said, if you're interested in Jewish answers to tough ethical questions, call for a class, participate in a class. And then there was a class at NYU.
I'm even surprised that was even in Jewish.
In Village Voice. Village Voice is like a gay. It's a alternative lifestyle, extreme left, communist, all kinds of interesting things. Paper that they gave out on campuses, and I saw in the back that ad, and I called, and I started going to these classes by another another from person that had a tremendous effect on me also. And ultimately, by the time between learning in our synagogue in Sheepshead Bay and going to these classes and putting on tefillin, I was ready to go to yeshiva one day, and I decided between going into a Lubavitcher yeshiva, which is called Mayanot, a Baal Teshuvah yeshiva, and a non-Hasidic yeshiva. And ultimately, because the recruiter for the non-Hasidic yeshiva took me to Dagi's and ordered this big fried onion for me, so he sold me on the yeshiva. That onion, that onion, I think called Meshuggah onion or something like that. That onion could sell you on anything.
I hope you still don't have heartburn from it.
I'm still trying to lose weight.
After this, we're going to get that on.
So, and while I was in yeshiva, I went for a couple of years in yeshiva. While I was in yeshiva, my friends decided that, my friend's wife decided that he's a boy, he speaks Russian. I know of a girl that speaks Russian, that she keeps mitzvahs. So it must be it's a match. They have everything in common. He's a boy, she's a girl. They both speak Russian, so it must be it's a perfect combination. There's no other. And I actually went out with this girl. That particular girl that they had in mind was already married. So they said, okay, give us another. But there was another blonde that was running around here. In that girl's school.
She probably speaks Russian too.
Yeah, no, she's also Russian, and that girl was available. I went on with that girl. That's the girl that I married.
Not only because she speaks Russian, right?
No, I liked her.
Was that your first date with her?
No, I didn't get married. Even though she made a joke on the first date, I said, we already went to the Kotel, we already went to the old city. I said, where do we go now? She said, now we're going to go to Zaks. Zaks is a Russian term for the office where you get married. That was her joke. But now we're gonna go get married because we already did it. It was the first date.
Also, I didn't know this was you went to Israel.
Yeah, I was in yeshiva in Israel.
The recruiter was here in the United States.
He recruited me here,
and then you went to Israel.
So this particular branch of that yeshiva, they recruited.
What yeshiva is that?
It's called Or Sameach.
Or Sameach, we know about Or Sameach.
So they have a program that they try to keep it as they try to brand as kind of a very cool, prestigious brand. They call it a center program. This was for American college grads, all same age, all from Baal Teshuvahs that are already like stable in their Yiddishkeit. And they're all kind of done with college.
Like I'm assuming in their 20s, right?
Early 20s, yeah. So they take them and they teach them Jewish texts and teach them how to learn Gemara, basically. But because regular Baal Teshuvah yeshiva has all kinds of weird people, different ages, different levels. These are all uniform kind of. It's a certain demographic that they wanted to focus on. They didn't have to struggle with. They didn't have to sell them on the idea of God. or that you have to give
It's
mitzvahs.
after that point.
Yeah, it's all a certain, it's a separate program.
Educated kids that already made a decision,
Exactly.
and we're just teaching them.
But because
how
they're
to
on
learn
Shuvas, they know how to learn Gemara, and they wanted to also acculturate them into a Haredi society.
So they start teaching you how to speak and like throwing words of Yiddish into the conversation.
So they
What the word Geschmack means, right?
Geschmack, yeah. So that was in the end of that I got in the beginning I bought myself a black hat, and towards the end I got engaged to a Shomer Shabbos girl, which is my wife. And I continued learning a little bit in Koilel for a few months. And
Where was that?
I learned that for Koilel, while Nor Sameach, I decided that I want to be a Lubavitcher. And
In Or Sameach?
In Or Sameach, yeah.
He's a weird guy.
So and then after my wedding, I already continued learning in Koilel in Mayanot, which is a Lubavitch yeshiva. And then after we finished all our wedding money, Mayanot didn't really have a Koilel, they didn't have money to pay me. So I was learning and spending my wedding money, which took about 5 months. And then we got a ticket and we came to New York, and I spent another year and a half learning in Koilel. I learned in the Mir in the Koilel. Because Mir had a program for Russian Jews, and they paid them $1,000 a month. And the Lubavitcher Koilel paid $250. I said, let me think, $250 or $1,000? Okay, so I went to learn in the Mir.
250 is enough for Kugel, Shabbos.
That's it. 50. It's not even enough for a quarter of the rent.
Right.
Because they assume that that families are supporting.
Right.
And which is true from families, but normal parents of Baal Teshuvahs, not only did they maybe already made peace with the fact that they walk around looking all weird, and they have a beard and they have tzitzis and yarmulke and they don't eat in their home, but that a married man should be not working and learning and getting a little stipend.
And he's an educated guy from Colombia. Go get a job.
So that's completely not normal, right? So that whereas in the Frum community it's completely normal. Even in Hasidic communities, it's normal to go learning Koilel for a couple of years after the wedding, and that's what I wanted to do. Basically,
all my nephews learned the first 3 years. No.
Right, and in the Litvish community, there are people that learn their whole life. So I learned in a year and a half, and then I went to work.
But you were already a Lubavitcher, man.
I was a Lubavitcher. I was a Lubavitcher even in Or Sameach. I was already a Lubavitcher.
Gamliel, I want to ask you something. I came to Chabad of Shipston. That's where I met you. That's where I met Moshe. And I stayed by Chabad. For me, I didn't have a formal education as you have. But you were in Or Sameach, which is not a Lubavitcher issue. And what made you decide to go with Lubavitch?
That's an excellent question.
Yeah.
I was exposed to Lubavitch even on that first day when I came to Shul. Yaakov Bam and Shipset Bey already taught me Tanya. I was exposed to Lubavitch ideas. I went to Crown Heights. I saw Seder Nigunim in 770. Which Seder Nigunim we have is a time when in 770 a couple of thousand people get together on Yom Tov and they sing Nigunim, and it's powerful in Shipset Bey. But when you have 2,000 people singing a nigun, it's a tremendous power. But
So you went actually to 770.
yeah, I went when I was still in school.
With this Rabbi Yaakov.
Yeah, I went for Shabbatons. I was exposed. I had a connection with Lubavitch. I didn't know, and when I went to Or Sameach, they explained correctly that before you get married, or at least during Shidduchim, you both have to decide what kind of home you're gonna have. You have to discuss what community you're gonna live in. You have to discuss where you're gonna send your kids to school. All of these things you have to discuss now. So to discuss them, you have to kind of make decisions. Which community where do you see yourself? That's the normal way to get married.
A lot of people going to say something about that. That's amazing. when in a shidduch system, people try to take the shidduch system and say, oh, it's two people that met and they said, okay, let's go. The parents said meet and they get married. You know what I'm saying? The main concept of the shidduch system is a shidduch system is meeting in order to get married and build up a family and a house, right? So the conversation is that's the main difference between a shidduch system and just meeting a girl or a boy someplace is that the focus of the conversation is, right? Okay, we met, nice to meet you, very good. Now, after, I don't know, some people 10 minutes and some people 2 hours, the conversation
Some
goes
people
into
takes weeks.
but
I had
what are we talking about? What are we, no, but I'm saying that starts sometime, right? Okay, so what are we doing? Where are we sending our kids? And that's the agreement you're trying to make.
Right, and many shidduchim can break up on that because they could not agree on which community, where they're gonna live, what kind of school.
But those shidduchim should break up on that.
Exactly, because
They
if
break up,
not,
break up.
it's gonna break up
Right.
later with a divorce and 3
So
children.
you get married with understanding, not, oh, I fell in love. There's some sense behind it.
Absolutely, and it makes perfect sense. So already at that point, when I was already, in dating my wife, I was already making. At that point, I stopped cutting my beard. When I met my wife, before I met her, I had to meet the daughter of Rabbi Silver. My wife, that was her condition on meeting with the boy, that they had to go and be interviewed by this unbelievable Rabbi. Rabbi Silver was one of the most famous rabbanim in the Soviet Union, and his daughter was a tremendous Talmidah Chachama, and I had to meet with her. And my wife told me that usually most boys that met with her before my wife would go out with them, she had something, a negative remark to say about them. About me, she didn't even want to talk about.
She couldn't find anything.
And my
wife
wife
asked you, Shviga could have found something.
My wife asked me, does he have a beard? Because my wife went out with literature boys, and the Chava Kuperman, which is her name, just I don't remember. And then my wife went out with me, and at that point I had a short beard. I was trimming it. At that point I stopped trimming it. So because I decided that I want to be a Lubavitcher and I want to live in Lubavitcher. How did I decide that? Because I felt that the Rebbe.
You ever met the Rebbe?
I never met. I came in 1995, and Gimel Tammuz was a year before. So I never met the Rebbe. No. But what attracted me was shluchim. Was openness and kind of a program that addressed the entire Jewish people and the entire world. The Rebbe had an ambition to transform the entire world. I never met, and I met, in yeshiva. I heard about different great Rosh Yeshivas that were great Torah scholars, but they were basically just there to serve their community. And even if individuals here and there ask them for help, they will help. I never met an individual, I never heard of an individual that is actually has an ambition, took responsibility for the entire world, entire Jewish people and the whole world. And that program, because the Rebbe would write a letter, for instance, and he would say, I'm writing this letter to all the Jewish men, women, and children wherever they are. I found it tremendously moving. I never saw another person that that took that approach. They were all responsible for their little kihila, for their little community, and the Rebbe was in a different league. And I just wanted to be a part, of his movement. That's that's the decision. That it was a difficult decision because vast majority of other boys obviously did not make that decision. But to me, it was pretty obvious, and that's what I wanted to do. And I communicated to my wife. We had to negotiate. My wife was not very happy with that, but ultimately, the agreement was that all of our children are going to learn in Lubavitch Shemaisen. It took many weeks to negotiate that. It wasn't easy, and it could break up the shidduch, such a thing.
somehow she
Because she
could've-
was also pressured from her side by her yeshiva and her.
That was the literature also.
Yeah, literature. Yeah.
And she put up with it. You know, the
Yeah.
weeks of negotiation and everything. I just want to say, I heard something. You said that you went out with your wife, meaning, that was your first girl you met, and you married. But you weren't her first
Oh, I
marriage.
was more like number 40 something.
I heard.
My-
So, this guy must be special.
No, but it's
After
not about-
meeting 40 guys,
I'm sure
marrying this guy.
that those 40 guys, a lot of them are special, but there's only one that that's intended for you, right?
Yeah.
It's not about, you could be special, everybody is special.
Yeah, he has that. It's not
But-
about how special this is. If this is your sholosh neshama, if this is your person.
It's
This is your soul.
I think she knew what she was looking for. And she looked at you and said, okay, weeks of negotiation, I'll put up with it. I want to marry this guy. I think that's probably the...
And the way she told me that she's ready to marry me was very like back of the hand, because we went to Ein Gedi. We went to not to Ein Gedi, we went to another mountain at a more difficult hike than Ein Gedi. I wanted to do very difficult. And basically the way I budgeted it, it got dark and we didn't manage to. We were still on the mountain. And I told my wife that I told she was not, we were dating. I told her that I think that that at this point we have to sleep here, because it's very dangerous to go down the mountain in complete darkness. It's not like a park where there are lights. It's when it's dark, it's completely
It's
dark,
dark.
and you cannot see it. There's moon, and you can see a little bit the path. She says, "No, I'm sleeping in my dorm. I'm not sleeping here with you on the mountain." I was. We were before the game got dark. I already understood where it's going. So I was like half a mile ahead, like trying to get out, and she was like climbing, trying to go behind me. And I decided to propose at that point. I asked her if she's gonna marry me. She was so angry. She didn't even respond to me, and she seriously considered like breaking up the shit with them. And a few weeks later, we were talking on the phone, and she told me, that she was speaking with her mother, and she told her mother that she's getting married. I said, "Oh yeah, to whom?" She said, "To you. If you're still inviting me to get married, then you told me a few weeks ago that you wanted to marry me. So if you're still offering, I'm ready." So
His technique was, you have no place to go back. You're stuck here on the mountain. He thought that's gonna work.
And we got out with a few scratches and a few falls. We made the last bus to Yerushalayim, and she indeed slept in her dorm.
You didn't sleep that night.
No, but we made it. We made it to the last bus, and there are not so many buses from there. It's like
It's like next to
and
Yamam
again,
Valley,
exactly. It's in the desert.
Yeah,
So
it's a real desert.
Yeah.
I once got stuck there at a gas station. Yeah, and I didn't have any gas, and I made it to the gas station in that area, and I was very excited. No problem. I had money here to pay gas.
Yeah.
But the gas station, there was nobody there. It was only credit cards. So late at night, there was no person there. It's
That's
dark,
it.
pitch dark. Remember, I was waiting there with my wife and my daughter. They were waiting like an hour until somebody showed up, and I come with him. I give him like, "Hey, here's 200 shekels. Could you swipe your card so I can get some gas?" It's dark in that area. I'm talking about at the gas station. You're talking about on the mountains. That it's out of the world. That place. It's really.
yeah. So but we made it, and that's it. So our children indeed went to Lubavitcher schools, and I wanted to get a little bit into this business, into what happened here. One day, when my oldest son was about
Into the escape room.
Yeah.
That's right. We're in the escape room, guys.
yeah, we're still here.
Yeah.
So he went to an escape room, which just started appearing in New York City.
Your son?
Yeah, my son was 13, and he was so mesmerized. He was so amazed at how fun it was.
To non-educated people.
He was amazed. He found it so engaging, so interesting, and his yeshiva. The young man that takes these boys to these places always tries to turn these experiences into a Jewish experience. So he took this Goyish escape room and he put stickers all over saying that we're trying to find the letters of the Frierdiker Rebbe, and he tried to Judaize the experience. And my son found it like not natural and a little bit funny about how he did that. I mean, it's very praiseworthy that he tried to do that. So my son decided that he wants to build one in our basement bedroom, and he was building it, and he was my oldest son, Yoel, who is now moved to Israel. So he built, and he was inviting our family friends and to this little escape room with locks, and I was watching. I was amazed at how it can excite. This idea of designing such an experience can excite, a teenager. And at that moment, I really decided that I want to build one. A Jewish one. It doesn't exist. I did the research. It doesn't exist, and I wanted to build one.
So the Jewish escape room was started by a 13-year-old boy.
So he didn't do a Jew. He did this.
Let me give him the credit.
Yeah,
it sounds good on paper.
The inspiration belongs to my son. Yoel was 13. Was not even 13. So now, since I was a teenager, I've had a passion of genealogy, a family tree. I was always looking to kind of discover my ancestors and my roots. And I actually have a Torah basis for doing it. When I was still in yeshiva, I met the Boston Rebbe. Okay, and Boston Rebbe.
I'm named after a Boston Rebbe.
Yeah.
Moshe. Really? Yeah.
So I met. So he lived in Harnof and he lived in Boston. He split his time between Harnof and Boston.
So his brother Moshe. Yeah.
Doesn't he have a shul?
I'm named after his brother.
Avenue K or L.
That's his nephew, I think. That's his nephew.
So there are many. There are several Bostoner communities.
Okay.
So I went to his house for lunch with a friend of mine
in Israel?
in Harnof, in Yerushalayim. The person that introduced me to him was with me in yeshiva. He was a great tzaddik, this boy. There's a book about him. It's called The Secret Life of Gershon Bird.
Yeah.
So he drowned when he turned 40. He was an unbelievable person. That's a separate discussion. You can read a book about him. There's a book, I think, an art scroll book about him, The Secret Life of Gershon Bird. So Gershon introduced me to the Boston Rebbe. As soon as Boston Rebbe heard about my last name, he said, "You have to research your last name." I asked
Which is
why.
Baderman.
I asked.
Not Bagelman.
I asked why. Because he said he's
the letters.
Exactly. So because of that tzaddikim with that name, it's not a very widespread name. There are not so many people. There are names like Schwartz, or Weiss. There are tens of thousands of families with that name, right? You don't know where that name. But there are certain names that are.
To me, there's a level of a family.
Right. So that's exactly. He said. I asked, but why should I do that? Because his son, who is the current Boston Rebbe, told him, when you have yichus, when you have can trace a connection to a great person, a tzaddik, you can ask Hashem for more. Then Hashem, in a sense, because of their merit, in a sense, is obligated to you. It also needs to be understood, exactly how that works. But when you have yichus, when you have great ancestors, Hashem, you have credit with Hashem.
When you have credit, you don't need to ask why. You just flow with it,
Exactly. You don't
accept
need big excuses to So since then, before I started, I was passionate about researching, my family tree. I was never able to actually find a connection with Lelev. And I'm still looking, but I came across a book just about when I was thinking about doing an escape room. I came across a book by an American Jew that I got to meet. He's an older gentleman, lives in California, that always knew that he's a descendant of the Shpola Zayda. And he wrote a book about that, about how excited he was to discover that connection. Not only is he descendant of the Shpola Zayda, he's a descendant of Pinchas Koritzer, and all the amazing rabbinic dynasties, including Rashi and King David.
So the Shpola Zayda was a grandchild of Rashi?
No, Shpola Zayda was that he was the first unbelievable person in his family, even though some say that he also has great yichus. But this American Jew that wrote the book, he found a gravestone in New York that said that his great-grandfather comes from two great tzaddikim, the Shpola Zayda and Reb Pinchas Mikoretz. Reb Pinchas Mikoretz was one of the senior Talmidim of the Baal Teshuvah, was a Hasidic master, and Reb Pinchas Mikoretz he was a Shapiro. He comes from the famous Shapiro rabbinic dynasty, okay, which comes straight from Rashi. There's 20 generations between him and
so
Rashi.
So Pinchas Kovetz is a grandchild of Rashi.
Great. So 20 generations, but we know all of them.
Oh, really?
All of them, 20 generations up, comes from Rashi. Actually, if you get involved in rabbinic genealogy, about half of Ashkenazim are descendants of Rashi. So,
what happened to the rest?
So the other half are descendants of somebody else, but not of Rashi. But and Sephardim are also descendants of great tzaddikim. I mean, this was checked about Rashi because Ashkenazim are so intermarried to each other that because of this, about half of us, if we were able to trace,
okay, that makes sense.
If
so
we're able to,
some way it comes back.
We're in many ways, in more than one way, because we actually most of us are relatively closely related to each other. So somewhere like 7 generations back, we could find a connection.
My wife is a cousin of Rabbi Cohen, by the way. Just found out a few months ago. And it sounds surprising, but it's not surprising. Like, they both come from Yerushalayim, what's right? They both have a Schlesinger. It's very, it's not, I'm sure anybody else in Shul also you could trace back, brother.
Right. So I read that, and I just found it incredibly exciting. I find it exciting that a Jew is able to trace that there is not only is there technology, but the very fact that you could name these people, that you could connect to them, and not just learn from their books, but actually count yourself among their descendants. I find it incredibly exciting. And I wanted to build an escape room around that idea, because I took his story and I basically turned that into an escape. Genealogy is a kind of a difficult process of research, of kind of problem solving with imperfect information, and so I turned that whole process into an escape room. In addition to adding stories about these tzaddikim, I just felt that these tzaddikim are so cool that everyone in the world must be excited about them. And I discovered that that's completely crazy and that's not true. That not everybody is excited to learn about the Shpola Zayda and the Reb Pinchas Mikoretz.
But if you are, you can come here. If you want.
Yeah. So it's not just about those specific ones, but about the very idea. It's a little bit like the psychology of Frankl about man's search for meaning.
I'm going to pretend to understand this.
That every person is looking to discover meaning in their life, and in a sense connecting to a great tzaddik, a great saint, a great person through your lineage is in a sense a way to kind of satisfy that search for meaning. It worked very well for this man that wrote the book. I asked him permission to use his story, and but I think that the reason why I was so excited, and I am excited by genealogy, and many other Jews are excited. Usually, Jews get excited by genealogy when they're already taking but земляные ванны, ground baths, when they're already smelling the smell of the grave. If you go to if you go to a place, if you go to these genealogical libraries, vast majority of people there are like old, and usually with American Jews, what happened? They're assimilated, no connection to Judaism. Once they're already smelling that where things are going, they're already in their 90s, they don't have so much longer. At that point, with many people, there is an awakening of a desire to connect to their ancestors. Most Jewish genealogies are very old. I felt a desire to connect to my ancestors when I was a teenager still, but I was unusual. Most people are not like that.
You are weird.
I am very weird, and but rabbinic desire to connect to tzaddikim is in a sense also has to do with the fact that a lot of Baal Teshuvahs in a sense betrayed their parents' home. They feel that way. They feel that they're not eating their parents' food, and they kind of rejected their parents' lifestyle. It's very painful. It's very painful for any parent to have their child reject what the parent is teaching them. It's a nightmare for a parent that their child should reject what they were teaching them.
I brought you up this way,
and they want to look
so I didn't
different.
do a good job. Okay, so what happened there, guys, is a group came for the other room for the Rashi room. So we jumped up and we ran out here to the Shpona Zayda's room.
That's right.
Yeah, Habibi.
So as I try to explain, so it's painful for a parent to have their lifestyle rejected, which is what happens with Baal Teshuvahs. They have to, Baal Teshuvah is very important for them to understand the pain of their parents, of having them radically change their lifestyle. A lot of Baal Teshuvahs are busy fighting with their parents. This is a knife that you use to cut cheese and eating in their parents' home, and it's not kosher. But there is a deeper kind of pain that a parent feels, and you can only understand this when you become yourself a parent. That a parent where a child says, "I don't like the system that we have here in our family. I'm going to do something else." That's very, very painful. So that's something that Baal Teshuvahs need to meditate about and things. So
not only Baal Teshuvahs. I'm sorry for interrupting, but this is important. I only realized and started really respecting my parents. I always respected them. But when I really started respecting them is when my daughter became like 13 years old. That's when I realized what it is to have a kid that's growing up and how important it is to show them the appreciation and everything. That's when I realized, that's when I started calling my mother every day, sometimes twice a day, just to say good morning, good night, and have a little conversation. That's when. So this is for everybody, I think. Don't wait till your kids grow up to learn how to understand and appreciate your children. Speak to people and understand them.
That's right.
I'm sorry.
So part of my kind of desire and powerful interest in genealogy was to kind of explain to my parents that if I'm able to find a great tzaddik, a great Rebbe as our ancestor, you could then go to your parents and say, "You see, I'm not the only crazy one in our family. We have ancestors that lived like this, And to me, having that is besides just interest in research, but it's kind of a justification, if you will, for your lifestyle choices of rejecting your parents' lifestyle but I'm not the only crazy one. Your ancestors lived like this. That's something that kind of drives my interest in doing this research, is being able to kind of to show that there's continuity.
So
In
instead
our
of
lifestyle.
you saying that I'm disconnecting from you and from my ancestors and changing my ways to a new way, no, I'm connecting to you and to your
I'm
grandparents.
reconnecting to your grandparents that for whatever reason you guys are far from that heritage, but Rashi lived like this. Rashi's lifestyle is very, very similar to what we do. He had Shabbos, he was careful about Shabbos, he learned a lot of Torah, and if you know that you're a descendant of Rashi or whoever else, whatever other great Torah personality, then you know what their lifestyle was like. There isn't really much. There's a lot of continuity in the Orthodox, in the Frum world, between the way they lived 500 years ago, 1,000 years ago, and the way we live today. It's a very, very similar. I mean, we look different, we dress in different clothing, but in many ways, it's a very, very similar lifestyle. We have similar values.
We also are a little bigger. Because we have more food.
So that's why when I got to meet Jeff Paul and observe his unbelievable genealogical success, I had to jump on that story.
What does it have to do with the tree? See, the whole time you're looking at the tree. You see, the tree is
Because in this escape room, so I mentioned that the escape room is kind of dramatizing his unbelievable genealogical success story. He was able to trace his roots all the way from the Shpola Zayda, which is Shpola Zayda and his wife on the top of the tree, all the way down to himself and his son. And he presented this family tree, this research, to his son as a bar mitzvah present.
Wow.
And he speaks about, like, after having spent his whole life being an assimilated Jew, distant from Yiddishkeit, how close to Yiddishkeit he feels now, how much he's growing now. Now that he understands that his ancestors were all these unbelievable Jewish leaders, King David, Rashi, all these different rabbinic families that he's a descendant of, and he's just, it completely took his appreciation for his own Yiddishkeit to a completely different level. And so when I created this experience, in a sense, I wanted to share this, this story. It's not just about this particular tzaddik, the Shpola Zayda or Pinchas Koritzer, but it's also about kind of continuity, about learning about the roots, about the excitement of this. As a Baal Teshuvah, I felt that it's important that there is such an institution where fun and game is combined with a deep and kind of moving message. So it's not just about fun. It's not just about education or research. It's about kind of combining kind of a leisure experience with deeper messages that move people to kind of do something in their with their life. And the actual original name that we had for this escape room was called One Before. When we rebranded since then, when I called it One Before, because there's a famous saying that having great ancestors is like a lot of zeros, unless you put one before those zeros, unless you yourself are a refined person that worked on himself or herself and there are something, then the fact that you have amazing ancestors doesn't help, because it's all just zeros. But if you are a one, if you are something, then all those zeros really help. It turns into a giant number, right? So it's all like a lot of zeros. You put one before, but nobody could understand that,
Too complicated.
It's a bad
marketing.
It's a bad name for a business. So it's just very unexciting to go on an escape room that's called One Before.
What is it called today?
It's called Peddlers and Parchments.
Peddlers and Parchments. I think the Jewish escape room. That's what I'm gonna call it.
Okay.
Just go to the Jewish escape room.
Yes, Jewish escape.
I think that's that's the way to go. I mean, it's your business. You're the one that knows.
Yeah, we'll talk about it.
This is an amazing Lubavitcher concept.
Yeah.
Of nobody told you to stop working. you have a family, you need to provide, right? Do a business, go work. But find a way to do it with a way of Jewishness and with a education twist to it.
Exactly.
That's beautiful.
So that's what I try to do. Yeah.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
Thank you.
I
so
think it
much.
would be interesting for people to watch it.
I think this is amazing. And we're not cutting off that last question, yes.
We're here in front of the one and only Jewish escape room here. And here, what are we doing? Oops, we almost broke the door, guys. Okay, nothing's going on, it's all good. What are we doing here? Here, we're gonna interview Gamliel with Reuven here about his Baal Teshuvah story, and we're doing it here in the Shpola Zayda room of the Jewish escape room. This doesn't look like the Shpola Zayda.
This is Woodrow Wilson.
Okay, it's somebody else, I don't know anything about. Now, okay, this is the first room of the Shpola Zayda's room, and there's another room you go into it, but to go into it, you need to come here and then you'll see the rest of it. Yalla, Habibi, Baal Teshuvah Express Gamliel. Watch the full video in the link below.